Hi, welcome to my talk today on life trajectories in literacy, charting the literacy values and feelings of teen mothers and their children. My colleague, Marva Headley, can't be here. She's still in Dubai. Basically, we began this research looking at the literature on teen mothers and found that there was a lot of research literature that seemed to point to low achievement and often paired that up with literacy. And we found also that lots of websites made much of this research, as this example here shows. Parenthood is the leading reason teens drop out of school. But we also discovered most recently that research by Weed and her colleagues in 2015 looked at this research on teen mothers and found that sometimes what was happening was there were assumptions built into the research by the researchers in terms of the questions asked, or the approaches taken, or the data that was interpreted. And often these were large-scale studies that looked at the relationship between variables or among variables. And so they'd start off with teen pregnants who had low educational attainment, and the low educational attainment led to poor life circumstances, which in turn led to teen pregnancy. And instead, Weed and her colleagues argue for what they're calling a person-centered approach that assumes heterogeneity. It reflects the vulnerabilities in the population, and it also reflects the diverse needs of the group being studied. So Marva and I decided that we would pursue this type of research, the person-centered type. And so we wanted to explore the feeling of teen mothers and their children towards literacy. We were informed by theories of literacy as a social practice. We didn't want to assume any fixed identities on the part of the teen mothers in particular, or their children. That is to say, we didn't want to assume that they would be good readers forever or bad readers. We also wanted to be informed by Vygotsky's research on the unity of affect and intellectual processes that Holtzman uses. We initially did a survey to recruit mothers, and we asked if they would be willing to volunteer for in-depth interviews, and those interviews took place at times and locations of their choosing. We had 8 mothers, as I said. They ranged in age from 20 to 22. Their children ranged in age from just under 6 months. There was one child, and basically from just under 6 months to 4 years old. And you can see there's quite a mix, but a large number of them are in that just about 1-year-old age range. Let's look at the mothers and see if their feelings about literacy remain stable across their lives. And if you look here and you look at the gray figures, this represents the mother's change across time in terms of reading. The ungrayed figures are writing. So if you look at the first one, we had one mother who started negative and stayed negative throughout her lifespan. 3 mothers who started positive and stayed positive. 4 mothers who started positive and became negative. And none started negative. If we look at the writing, 1 started negative and remained negative, 1 started positive and remained positive, 3 started positive and became negative, and most interestingly, 3 started negative and became positive. We did look at the relationship between their children's feelings and the mother's feelings. At least one of the teen mother's children were positively disposed towards reading, and this matched pretty well with the teen mothers themselves as children, because they were, for the most part, with that one exception, positively disposed towards reading. Now, in terms of writing, if we look at writing and we look at the teen mother's feelings as a child and how the child's feelings relate to that, we have one case where the mother was positive and the child was positive, 3 cases where both were positive about writing, and 1 where both were negative. If we compare the feelings of the children now to the feelings of their mothers, 2 cases of mothers being negative but the child positive, 2 cases where both are positive, and 1 both are negative. And one thing I'm going to say is you might notice there aren't 8 mothers here, and that's because some of the children are quite young, so we couldn't talk about writing for those children. And you're going to find that that's the case in the data, that there are times when talking about writing for the very young children is just not appropriate. So then we tried to think about how we contextualize this pattern. So we looked at social context, and we found that mothers based some of their actions on their own life's lessons. So, for example, here we have Daphne saying, if she doesn't like reading and writing, keep pressuring her for it. Keep telling her if you need this for an education. Because in my opinion, I only have half grade 10. Her father has his full grade 12. So if she tries to say, well, mommy and daddy, I want to leave. I don't like this. I'm going to continue to tell her, like, no, you need this to get somewhere in life. Mommy's scheduled every day to find work and everything else because she doesn't have her full grade 12. So you're going to make something of yourself and you're going to be a proper young woman. You're not going to sit there and depend on a man to teach you and take care of you when you can do that all your own. Another thing we looked at is what home situation was like in terms of literacy. And when the moms were children, we found that the mother took over much the role of literacy for the teen moms. And you can see that here for reading. And you'll also see that basically that role ranged from almost non-existent to fairly frequently. So there was a considerable variety. And the other thing we found for the teen moms was that when they recollected writing in early childhood, they tended to focus on the possessions of writing, like their colored markers, their pens, their papers. But the other thing they recollected more was the didactic approach. Repeated dot to dot, repeated handwriting, and no focus on the content of what they did. But when we look at their children, the teen mothers' children, and the home literacy environment for those children, we see the mothers as being extraordinarily supportive, the teen mothers. They understand the importance of having a variety of interesting literacy materials, concept books, and so on. They make sure everybody gets involved. They see reading as often as good for children. You have somebody like Alyssa. For her first child, she read when she was a newborn, and now for her second child, she's been reading to her in the womb. They draw attention to environmental print. You get Malika saying everything we do, she shows her the words, but they also find that time is a challenge, like many parents. They actively cultivate a love of reading, and they do this by the choices of books they make, the textures, the feeling. As Taylor says, she doesn't want to force them, but she wants to make them want to read. These mothers understand it's important for children to have choice in materials. They accommodate dispositional and developmental differences. They spend most of their emphasis on reading, and that is due to the age of the children involved. In terms of a different social context, school isn't an issue for the kids because of their age, but for the teen mothers, their recollection of school for the most part is that it's unremarkable, which is kind of sad. And when it is remarked upon, they focus on things like the form and length of text, and there's no sense of the emotional warmth that characterized their early literacy experiences at home, yet they understand the importance of reading. As Malika says, reading is everything in school. You have to read to answer those questions. You have to read that type of book to answer those questions. And if you can't do that, if you don't want to do that, then you're not going to be successful. So then we thought, okay, when we look at these contexts, what is literacy used for? Here we found that at home, reading was pleasurable. And some of the teen mothers continued those pleasurable reading activities on their own. Raja and her reading of the subtitles of Indian movies, for example, was one case. And Daphne has a fabulous description. She says, even if I'm sitting there and say, for instance, the baby's doing something with daddy and it's like, okay, I'm bored. You know what? I haven't picked up a book in a while. I'm going to read. I'll read 8 chapters and I'll look up and I'll be like, oh snap, is that the time already? Okay, then I'll go on my business. But I'll still have the book in my hand, reading as I'm cooking or while I'm cleaning or I'm doing whatever. I'll still do it. The other thing that was quite noticeable is how These teen moms have pleasure in their children's pleasure. And when they see their kids enjoying a book, they enjoy the pleasure of their children's enjoyment and also their children's accomplishments. Another purpose that was quite interesting was how much these teen moms focused on preparation for schooling for their children. So literacy was to prepare kids for school. Rachel says she works as much as possible at home on literacy so that something they enjoy, something they do well at, so that when the teacher asks for them to read to class, they can recognize the words because I'm practicing with them all the time. Alyssa talks about trying to find new techniques with her kid. And Peyton talks about hours of preparation that she does to make sure her kids are ready for school. One of the things that was quite interesting was that teen mothers themselves use literacy to get by in life. And in today's society, of course, that means getting by is related to technology. And Raja gives a wonderful description of how embedded that literacy for getting by in life is. She says, if I need to look up something, if my daughter was sick, or if I need to know how to use something or troubleshooting something, I would look it up on the internet, or look up like weight loss or things, or like anything. I would look it up and read about it, or even some words I don't understand. You're always looking up. If you can't pronounce it, it's there to say for you. Or if you need to look up like a plot for some movies, I would look that up because I'm watching it. I think I prefer that because it gives you the short form of everything. Another interesting purpose for literacy in some of these young women's lives is literacy for self-reflection. Not for reading, but for writing. So that, for example, Alyssa talks about when she has a bad day and she can't get a hold of her mom. She writes out everything. She keeps writing. She writes to think about what happened in the day. And Peyton says, I'd rather sit there and write something than read. I'll sit there and write little sayings now that I'm thinking of in my head. And this is from somebody who really struggled in school. So if we want to frame the feelings of teen mothers in terms of literacy, we can go to Frankfurt, who talks about the importance of what we care about. As we look at the data across these young women and their children's lives, but most particularly speaking for the women themselves, we see that they are very conscious about literacy, particularly for their children, not so much for themselves. They act and have agency in support of their children. They buy books, they do things, they read to them, they get them ready for school. But they don't seem to do this for themselves. Only a couple of them are enrolled in extra classes, for example. And it may well be because of the particular point they are in their lives. They only have time for so much. They're persistent, interestingly. For some in reading, they maintained reading throughout, despite some of the boringness of school, for example. For others in writing who took up a writing of a personal sort, even though they really didn't like writing earlier on. And for all of them, they are persistent with their literacy engagements with their children. The other interesting thing is that they are open to the benefits and losses of literacy. They struggle in school, but they invest in their children. They invest hope. They worry about their children as they prepare them for school, but they hope that their children will have better literacy lives than they did. Thank you very much.